This is the story of the self-confessed Boston Strangler.
Hollywood thought they got the story right in 1968 when actor Tony Curtis played Albert DeSalvo in the movie The Boston Strangler. Since then, dissecting the life and psyche of Albert DeSalvo has become something of a cottage industry. With no trial and no known physical evidence, all that's left to unofficially indict DeSalvo are hours of confession interviews, including those with his attorney, F. Lee Bailey.
I obtained a copy of the transcript of Bailey's interview of Albert at Bridgewater State Hospital.
For more than a decade, attorney Elaine Whitfield Sharp has been trying to prove DeSalvo's confession was bogus. Her client, DeSalvo's brother, and other family members.
Bailey led him in the questioning. And he would say things like, well, when you went up the stairs, did you see a broad green and white striped chair? Well, this is an example. And Albert would say, yes, yes. Myself and another individual counted the number of leading questions in that interview, and we stopped counting at 350.
The official state interviews were conducted by then Assistant Attorney General John Bottomley, a lawyer who had never handled a criminal case. Nobody was happy with that.
Bottomley, who was an eminent domain lawyer, was going to interrogate the biggest serial killer in the history of the city. Nobody wanted Bottomley to do the interrogation. None of the investigators did. They were so mad. My dad was just like punching his hand through walls.
Bottomley was very inartful. He had no experience, knew nothing about interrogation. But when you boiled it all down, it wasn't the questions. It was the answers. And the ongoing issue, could someone have told this story without having been at the scene?
Others who've studied the 50-plus hours of interviews argue DeSalvo bungled far too many facts.
I put those confession tapes up to the autopsy reports in the murders, and they did not match. Albert DeSalvo was confessing to events that never happened.
Author Casey Sherman is the nephew of Mary Sullivan, the last of the strangling victims. His book, A Rose for Mary, details the facts of her death, concluding an old boyfriend was a much better suspect.
Albert DeSalvo claimed that he had choked Mary with his thumbs pressed against her Adam's apple. Now, her autopsy showed that she was strangled with 2 scarves and a nylon stocking, so Albert DeSalvo could not even get the easiest detail in the last crime correct.
There were these huge discrepancies between the actual facts of each crime and what DeSalvo gave as his version of the facts.
Crime writer Susan Kelly published her book, The Boston Stranglers, plural, in 1996 after talking with detectives from several jurisdictions.
Every person I talked to raised the same question, said to me, who do you think the Boston Strangler was? And at that point, I'd say, I don't know, you tell me. And they'd say, it wasn't Albert DeSalvo. Just everyone in law enforcement.
Kelly also argues the murders were atypical of a serial killer because they didn't follow patterns in age or race or in the crimes themselves.
Some of the crime scenes were much worse than others, much more sadistic, much more violent. So there were not 10 identical features in each case, which is another reason to argue that these were not serial killings.
Even the way that the killers tied the knots in many of the Boston Strangler murders was different from case to case. To me, that's more frightening, because now you know that so many people were capable of these grisly, heinous crimes.
The doubters also point out that DeSalvo supposedly had a photographic memory, meaning he should have remembered every detail.
There is no such thing as a photographic memory. His memory for detail was extraordinary, but it wasn't perfect. And if it had been perfect, I would have been suspicious that somebody was feeding him the answers.
Over the years, F. Lee Bailey has encountered many skeptics. He lost patience long ago.
The naysayers typically are the uninformed, and the less they know, the louder they shout. I've never met one that had a story to tell that was worth listening to. So I don't give them much attention.
My dad said, people can say in 2 sentences that DiSalvo wasn't the strangler. And I can show you documents for 3 weeks that says he was. Casey Sherman's sitting there in a news conference with the DiSalvo family, and they start talking about my dad and basically calling him incompetent. Wait a second. I'm sorry, but these guys spent too much of their lives working on this. That means all those detectives who worked in those cases never solved them. And I find that hard to believe.
Albert DiSalvo was stabbed to death in his sleep in November of 1973. Some people believe he was killed because he was about to recant his confession. Others, including F. Lee Bailey, say DiSalvo was killed by rival drug dealers. The case, officially, remains open. We'll bring you up to date when Chronicle continues. More than a decade ago, the family of Mary Sullivan sponsored DNA testing of semen found on her exhumed body. Evidence the family says was not that of DiSalvo. The state also conducted DNA testing, which was, in their words, severely limited. The Attorney General's office says there is no physical evidence they are aware of in any of the other cases, meaning that for now, there is nothing to test using modern DNA science. But the AG's office does say our office is willing to review options to see if there are any avenues left which might provide answers. That's Chronicle for tonight. Thanks for joining us. Good night.